I'm Seamless, and today I'm going to show you how to make this bass. And I'm using this bass as an example to talk about what I have in the title, which is applying RM synthesis to FM synthesis and Citrus. This is actually somewhat specific. You can kind of do the same thing in Massive on things. Like the mod oscillator has a bunch of targets. You can target the filter, the wavetable position, phase, which is basically FM, and then it has a setting called ring, which stands for ring modulation. And in Citrus, we have someone talking to me. In Citrus, we have FM, which is frequency modulation. It's the matrix you see by default, but there's this whole other one down here for RM, where you can engage ring modulation of one operator to another. So it works almost like FM. It behaves a little bit differently in terms of what the wave shape actually does to another operator. So this is actually a pretty standard FM patch that I applied some RM shenanigans to. So this is what it sounds like with the RM on. It's also being vocoded and compressed and all kinds of stuff. I'm gonna reverse engineer this whole thing so you can see what's up. But then this is what it sounds like without the RM engaged. It's a pretty big difference. It makes it kind of grittier, and it adds like more space in between in the sound, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon, which I enjoy. And so now I'm going to show you what's up. So first, what I'm going to do is this is a vocoding setup, as you can see here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to separate the individual bits so that you can hear what they sound like not being vocoded.
You and me. No.
That's the modulator, which I'm actually running into a harmonic.
You and me. No.
With the scale off.
You and me. No. You and me.
Although when you saw it when it was on, I have this engaged, which is actually a per spectrum area scale amount that you can engage. But I decided just to do full no scale at all.
You and me. You and me. You and me. You and me.
Now I'm also editing these things over here. So I started by messing with the detune function, and if that's what it sounds like without the pitch modifier is engaged, but this is obviously too high, so I engaged the pitch modifiers to kind of deal with that. And then this automation clip is messing with the overall detune level, which I've talked about before in various other Harmer videos. But the modulator is not really important. I mean, it is important, obviously. It's kind of important because you can't, modulate. You can have a vocodec space without a modulator and a carrier. But what we're talking about today is the RM applications of FM synthesis, which is this sound. So that's what it sounds like with the RM. And that's what it sounds like without the RM. So now let's talk about the overall setup of this sound. So this is actually a FM preset that I like to use for things. I usually open this up and then mess with it to get something new and unique, or I just leave it alone if I'm going to use it on like a carrier for a vocodec space, because then a lot of the qualities of the sound will be determined by the vocodec settings and also by the carrier or the modulator that you decide to use. So oftentimes the carrier is not super duper important, but this time, however, the focus is on the characteristics of the carrier itself, and the vocoder and the modulator are really just to add additional texture to the sound. Okay, so let's deconstruct this part by part. I'm going to turn off all the RM stuff. Let's just focus on the FM. So the primary modulating operator, that is to say, the one that is modulating the output operator, which is operator 1. It's going out. Operator 2 is modulating operator 1, and I've changed the oscillator shape of operator 2. That's this oscillator tab here in Citrus. If you open up any of the operators, you have these tabs. The oscillator one is the one that I created here to make this sound. Now, if you look at my tutorial, how to bass 4 or 6, I think it's 6, where I go over the super duper basic theoretical aspects of FM. I talk about the reason why you get this sort of vocally sound from a triangle with a high harmonic and that's what I'm replicating here to get this sort of sound. And this is just I just dicked around to get something that something that sounded cool. So these lines here, the top lines are amplitude levels of harmonics. So this is actually like a little additive universe here, because what you can actually load in a shape. You can drop a shape like if I had a really you can drop it in anything and it'll do its best to make it into a waveform, but you can make waveform shapes, just anything, and you can drop it into an operator and it will synthesize it through here. It'll actually try and make the waveform by calculating harmonic values, which is kind of like what Harmor does, because that's what additive synthesis is all about, is messing around with harmonic partials, which is what these are, to create a waveform. By default, they all have the fundamental engaged, and that's just your base note. And here I just happened to choose these two because I thought it sounded good. These bottom bars down here are the phase of that given partial. So you see here I've actually slightly messed with the phase of this operator. Super duper slight sound on there, but I'm modulating this entire operator by another operator. Now I emphasized this entire operator because my usual FM setup is to have two different operators operating the main output, which is to say I would normally have 2 and 3 operating the main out. And what that would do is I would have 2 be the fundamental without any of this at all, and 3 I would just turn up really loud, which would be this note right here, and or really high rather, and that would be the high harmonic, and then I would modulate that separately from the primary modulating oscillator, which in this case is number 2. But I decided to see what it would be like if I did it just with the whole one, and you can see it's super duper light. As you can see, certain positions of the on the phase of this operator greatly affect its characteristic of the sound. Now, a cool thing about Citrus is that you can actually modify the phase of an operator on the fly, and you can even control it while it's moving, which is not something you can normally do really with anything. And you do this by going. You have here, you have a phase tab, and you can just set it up so that, like, if I wanted to, I can make the phase change with the X modifier, which could create some interesting sound effects if you so inclined to mess with that. Most of the time, I don't really mess with that. I like to make static changes with the oscillator tab. You can also do it up here without, you can do 0 to 100. I thought this was a negative, but it's not. That really wouldn't make any sense. Because really, 100% phase is just 0% phase. It's the exact same position kind of deal. And 50% is inverted wave physics. So that's cool. Now, I also have number 5 oscillating number 2. Now, this was all a very interesting experiment I did, and I messed with the phase, and then I have 6 oscillating itself, and that was for very interesting reasons. Now I'm going to turn off 5 and 6. I'm going to turn off 3. So that's what this sounds like, or turn off 4 too. So that's what that sounds like by itself after, of course, it's being run through all kinds of... Actually, no, this is going straight out to the master, which has some compression engaged. But it's really just for loudness right now. So that's what that sounds like. And then we add in this second operator. It kind of adds a little bit of grit. And then I had this third operator with the off-kilter phase, which is kind of interacting with this operator. But as you can see, they're also 2 different waveforms. Here's something else interesting, is that I'm controlling how much... That's interesting. I'm controlling something else. Where's this one? Somewhere in here, something is being... that's it. Okay. I'm controlling the volume of this operator with the y-axis, which are these two. This here. This is the FM portion of the whole vocoded bass setup, and this is the X mod, and this is the Y mod. And my typical setup for an FM synth is to have the modulation input of operator 1 be X. So this is what it looks like when I set it to X. and by default it's all is everything. So this is actually a set because it's not set by default. What this does is it will modulate how much FM into operator 1 is actually affecting operator 1. And this is important to realize that this actually is like if I had all of these in there, it would change everything. But you could get the exact same effect by modulating the volume of your modulating operator, because that's actually what's creating the difference in sound when you modulate an FM source. Because you can turn on FM, so something is FMing something, but it'll be static if you're not altering some parameter. And the main parameter that causes FM modulation as we know it, as we hear it in songs and stuff, is the volume of the modulating oscillator. That's like the most basic cause of all these sounds. Now, just for fun, I'm also modulating 2's input very slightly with the mod X, so that as it goes up, is not as hard at the top of the most open position, which is just me kind of messing around, but that's what that is. And so now I'm also modulating 5, or no, I'm not. I keep thinking that I am, but I'm not. But so this is actually the main. That's actually the main whole thing. And then I have operator 4 here, not doing anything. I just have it on with the modulator on the volume. This is because when you modulate a pure sine wave with anything, when you FM it, it's not going to be the pure sine wave anymore when it's on full modulation, which means for a bass sound, you're going to lose your low end. For most people, this isn't really a problem because they solve this by reinforcing everything with a sub bass and high passing everything, which is, fine. But I like everything to be as all inclusive as possible and a very elegant solution. So I put an operator out and then I just have it be a sine wave. And then when X is all the way up, causing the highest amount of FM, that's when 4 is fully engaged. And when it's all the way down and the sound is actually just a sine wave because nothing is modulating the output operator, I make it I meant to turn it over here. Make it off. Now you know that I like to turn it to the left a lot, which is actually negative phase. You can do negative phase or you can do positive phase, and they do have a difference when you have things interacting with positive and negative phase. But if you have everything in one phase or everything in one other phase, there is a difference in the sound, but it's very slight. It's not like, oh, I could tell it's a positive phase, I could tell it's a negative phase. It's not super duper important at that level, so I'd like to most of the time I just do things left. Or if I'm messing around, I happen to like how it sounds when it's on the right versus on the left, then I'll leave it there. But I kind of don't want my sub basses to be out of phase, so that's why that's like that. Now I have operator 6 here oscillating itself, and that's because of what it's doing here in RM land. Now, look at this shape I have going on here for the RM oscillator. It looks freaking weird, and this is because RM actually kind of behaves like the wave shape looks, which is not what happens with FM. With FM, when you modulate something like with a sine wave, it'll actually behave like a sine wave looks, but then when you modulate it with a triangle wave, suddenly it starts to behave weirdly. It doesn't go like straight up at a constant rate and then straight down at a constant rate. It just stays at a whole value and then immediately switches to another value and then immediately switches to another value. And this adds to why a triangle sounds the way it does. And there's examples of this in my video How to Base 6 that I mentioned earlier. And this has to do with the fact that in FM, it doesn't actually modulate like the parameter of it. It doesn't actually modulate the pitch parameter based on the wave shape. It modulates it based on the wave's slope. So on a sine wave, the slope is changing, and then then it's changing, and it's changing back, and it's changing back, and so the pitch is going to move as slowly back and forth based on the change in the slope. And here in triangle land, it's just solid slope. It's +1, and now it's -1, and now it's -1, now it's +1, now it's -1, now it's +1. So the sound is going to be one pitch, and then the top pitch, and then the bottom pitch, and then the top pitch, and then the bottom pitch, with no movement in between. It's just going to appear one way or the other. And then if you were to change it to a square wave, you'd get there's no slope at all. And then there's also just no slope, and there's still just no slope. It's just the same value forever, except for some pops and clicks that show up because, physically speaking, the camera really modulated that fast. It's supposed to be instantaneous based on what the waveform represents. And it's the same thing for a saw wave. However, they do have decent applications, in real FM principles. I've Nucleon in the FL forums showed me this trick you can do with FMing using a saw wave, where you can mimic what oscillator sync does, and oscillator sync is a really cool thing. Honestly, I have a video about it. I think it's how to base 10. It's an old one. Look for OSC sync in the title, and that'll be what it is. However, in RM, ring modulation, or amplitude modulation, because it is modulating the volume, that's what RM does, it actually will do what the shape says, like for real. So in this example, I have I've used these interesting wave shape modifiers, and these modifiers exist to basically make applicable waveforms for these purposes. And I think what this is doing is that the middle position is actually a 0 value for RM, and top and bottom is positive and negative or something. Maybe I might be wrong about that completely, but this position is what I ended up doing, and this is actually a phase change one. And there's a bit of distortion going on because I actually started out with this very slight, almost a saw wave position. I could actually just do a saw wave and then do this because what I really want is a square wave. But if I do that, then that happens, and that creates that sound. It kind of sounds staticky, and I don't really like it. So I make this so it's actually kind of like it's a little rounder. And then again, that static is showing up, and it has to do with this. And now it's less staticky sounding. And that sound is the sound of the volume turning off and on so fast that it's clicking. It's a click sound. It's like an audible click. So this smooths it out a little bit. I'm remembering now why I did that. Not need to be that far. And I'm self-oscillating 6. This is called feeding back. You can do this in FM8 as well. And I did that just to see what it kind of sounded like. Sound is extraordinarily subtle, but there's a difference. And sometimes those high clicks are useful because as we're using this for a carrier in a vocoded bass, they're not always going to be audible. And in fact, they'll just add more things for the vocoded to modulate over and make the sound come in clearer, which can be cool. A lot of this, however, was just massive. Oh yeah, I forgot I had phase difference. Oh, not super duper important. So this is more or less the construction of the FM bass in this setup. And really, that's what I wanted to focus on, was using RM. And the whole reason why I did that is to kind of create this space here. Now, I did it originally at the tone. So like everything's at 2. See, now the effect is much more apparent. So yeah, RM is lots of fun. Now, something else to mention about how RM works in Citrus, there are still only the 6 operators. There's not 12 or 6 FM operators and then 6 RM operators. They are the same operators. So if I had operator 6, FMing operator 3, it would also be RMing operator 3. So when you make changes based on that, there will be both happening at once, which caused me a great deal of confusion when I first discovered you can do this. But now I know, and now you know as well. If you're curious, RM ring modulation is called what it is, and not like amplitude modulation or something, because the original hardware configuration circuit, like the original circuit shape, was a ring that causes this effect. So it was a ring modulation. That's what that is. All right, so I already covered what the modulator is. So let's bring it back into vocoded. That's a little bit different sounding. Now, I want to talk about the effects I have on this. So I have vocoded, obviously. This is a pretty usual kind of vocoded setup for me. I have a lower band count than usual. I've kept the hold, attack, and release times pretty usual, and this is set the taste. This is kind of the internal EQ, which is nice. I've actually increased the bandwidth on most parts of it, just because. The configuration I have now is mostly to combat that ringing sound that happens at those particular levels. It wasn't easily solved by EQ, and it got rid of parts of that part of the spectrum that I kind of wanted to keep. And this is the pitch bending per band. So that's to say that these bands are actually being pitched up and these are being pitched down, which is extremely helpful because when you pitch a whole modulator input down, you lose lots of the high-end definition because you just moved all of that spectrum down. So then you can bring it back up so that you can actually keep definition going on in the high end of the frequencies, but you can get, this is especially helpful when you're using like a female vocal as a modulator because it's really high. So in order to get it that far down and to make it like comparable with this sound, you would end up moving like what used to be 20k hertz to like 8k hertz. And so now you're missing the top 12k of the spectrum. And so you can bring that back by boosting it like that or something. I have step editing engaged, which when you don't, you do everything the traditional way. And when you do, you can draw your lines like so, and it'll do its best to create the curve. You can turn snap on, and then it'll actually keep it like so. If it actually makes straight lines like that. If you wanted to do that, you can. I believe that's everything about this. So I'm done. I'm compressing it. This is what this all sounds like without the effects. This is just a recording edison. Much darker sounding. Maximus is just bringing out, the frequencies that matter. EQ is tempering it to my tastes, and this is a secondary EQ because this first EQ, everything is doing something except like this guy, which I couldn't solve what I needed to solve with just that one guy. So I may have done the EQ, which you might think is not the smartest thing. You might be right. However, I don't really care because it did my job that I wanted to do. And I typically don't have to worry about CPU issues or latency for that matter. So I don't really run into issues with just stacking too many effects, which is probably not the greatest practice in the world, but that's okay. Is my voice running through the sidechain? It is. That's funny. There's also a compressor on the master, but like I said earlier, it's just loudness, so it's not really shaping the sound like this one is. You might also see this thing going on. This is a reverb I have going on top of it. For kicks. I have that disengaged because it's not really important. You might be wondering what this massively complicated mixer setup is, and that's because I actually am in a song right now. And I'm not going to play it for you because it's a secret. Ha ha ha. Indeed. But so largely this whole thing was really just to talk about the RM capacity of Citrus. Unfortunately, this is something that, as far as I know, is pretty much it's only something Citrus can do. I don't think FM8 has any kind of ring modulation matrix or whatever like that. I haven't actually looked at FM8 in a while. One day I will, and I'll see if it is. You can do RM related stuff in Massive, and the way that you would do that is you would set the target to be whatever oscillator you want to target, and then you would engage ring modulation, and then you would set the pitch of the ring modulation to either be 0, 0 or -12, depending on whatever wavetable you're using and how high pitched it sounds. Thinking about stuff that I need to tell you about things that matter about this sound. Pretty sure I covered everything. If I didn't, you can ask me questions. I'll try to answer them. Yeah. Usually, I mean, I know I do a lot of reverse engineering of sounds that I've made, but I'm hoping that this wasn't too confusing. I know, because this was a pretty detailed setup to begin with, and I'm hoping that the deconstruction of it went well and that you can actually understood things that I'm doing in here. Yeah. So, if you have any questions, let me know. I'll try to answer them. And as usual, have a nice day. Yeah.